And welcome everybody to another Nothing Like a Good Book with your host Mark Bishop. And I got a fabulous one today by author Elizabeth H. Van Doren. Now, as the dark clouds of Hitler's tyranny gather, Andre Hoog, he's a scholar and a war veteran. He's horrified to see the rapid descent of his beloved country into barbarity. Now, determined to protect his family and fight against the rising tide of hatred, Andre must navigate the dangerous waters of a society where justice and humanity are being systematically dismantled. Now, through the eyes of multiple characters, each facing their own battles against oppression, this novel paints a vivid picture of the fear, bravery, and sacrifice required to stand up against evil. So from the tragic events at the University of Berlin to the chilling encounters in the streets of Potsdam, Crossing the Line is the name of the book. It's a powerful exploration of the lengths people will go to preserve their integrity and humanity in the face of overwhelming darkness. So in this harrowing yet inspiring story, Elizabeth H. Van Doren delivers a narrative that is both historically rich and emotionally resonant, reminding us that even in the darkest times, the light of resistance can shine through. So the main character, Andre, he undertakes a clandestine mission during World War II, set in Berlin, Wannsee in December 1939. Wannsee in December 39. So that takes us back to that era. Crossing the Line is the name, as I said. It's a gripping tale of courage, resistance, and the unbreakable bonds of family in the shadow of Nazi Germany. So welcome, Elizabeth H. Van Doren. Tell us about Andre, who's tasked with rowing two Allied spies across the Havel River under the Glenicke Bridge, which connects Wannsee and Potsdam. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Andre got involved with resistance efforts very shortly after Hitler was elected or put into power in 1933. And his efforts escalated through the years, culminating in the episode that you described, which happened shortly before the end of the war in the 1940s, where it was understood that really the only way to put an end to Hitler's regime would be to have him fail militarily. Because the people of Germany were very tired of the war, that's for sure, but they were still behind their leader. And if that leader could fail, then Andre and his fellow resistors felt that Germany could turn the page and they could start to regain decency and humanity in their country. And so that effort was his first, and it's difficult because he was a patriot for Germany. He'd fought for Germany in World War I. And now he made the decision to assist the Allies against his own country.
Well, very descriptive here. You wrote that as he navigates the waters on this moonless night, he relies on his surroundings, including familiar sounds like the screeching peacocks of Waffensel to orient himself, right?
Right. So the town of Wannsee is along the Lake Wannsee, and there's a island called the Fraueninsel in that same lake. And on the Fraueninsel are peacocks. And the meeting place for him to pick up these two spies was somewhere in the vicinity of this island. And so as he was rowing in the dark, moonless night, he could hear the peacocks. And so he knew that he was getting close to the meeting point.
Well, the artwork on the book is fabulous. It's going to be on my site, on markbishopmedia.com. Plus, it's going to be distributed right throughout all the podcast platforms, the popular ones and so on. So, folks, if you're busy and you're going to miss this, don't worry. It's going to be around for some time. The author is Elizabeth H. Van Doren. because there is another Elizabeth Van Doren. Did you know that? But there's only one H. Okay,
That's right.
And this is a fabulous book. It's the accolades, and I'll go through them a little bit later. But through the historical context and relevance, well, we're talking point that we are crossing the line. I mean, it is set focusing on the rise of Nazism and in the impact of Hitler's regime, but what it did to ordinary citizens. You know, we often think of the other side, but tell us about the book, how it sheds light on the experiences of those that you think, Elizabeth, through these times, particularly the Jewish community and those who resisted this oppressive regime.
Yeah, I feel like when Hitler came to power, new lines were laid down by that regime every day, and each one more horrifying than the previous. And for Andre and Herta, his wife, my grandparents, they saw what was happening, and it was happening very fast. It's in my book. It starts with the book burning in 1933, May of 1933, and Hitler came to power at the end of January 1933. So a very short period of time later, this massive book burning takes place, and it takes place at the university. This is a world-renowned university. It's where Einstein studied and taught. It's many greats were a part of that history. And so for the professors and the students of this institution to be out there throwing books of those great masters into this enormous bonfire made Andre realize that Hitler isn't going anywhere. He was so convinced that within a couple of months he would be ousted, but he wasn't. He gained in popularity very rapidly. And so he decided that night when he came home, decided with his wife that they would find other people, just ordinary people, who were as appalled as they were with what was happening to their beloved country. And so quietly, they made connections with other just ordinary people. And it came at really, really great risk, because it wasn't long before tremendous punishment was implemented to anybody who voiced opposition. You know, initially it was maybe losing your job, then it became being put in jail, and within a few years it was a matter of being sent to a concentration camp where you were left to die. Just for opposing Hitler.
Just for opposing. It's sort of reminding me of something that's going on today a little bit, but...
a little bit. A little bit, yeah.
Andre Hoog and his family, they grapple with the ethical dilemmas posed by the Nazi regime, and they really just choose to fight against tyranny in their own ways, don't they? I mean, personal, family struggles. Why don't you highlight the personal and family struggles that I'm referring to for these characters? What do you think?
Yeah.
The story is very relatable. It's very human. But despite its historical setting, the psychological toll for them during this time must have been astronomical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was. And it's something that my grandfather and I spoke with very often, because the decision to essentially risk everything it could not have been easy. For example, I have a lot of examples, but one that comes to mind at first is he had two young daughters at the time, aged 6 and 9, when Hitler came to power. So they were very young. And they had very different personalities. The older one is Pülein. She was very outgoing, gregarious. Both girls were forbidden by their parents to join the Hitler Youth, because they were so afraid that the fun things that the Hitler Youth engaged in would sway the girls, and they would be brainwashed, so to speak. So they forbade them from joining. But to forbid your children from joining Hitler Youth is against the law. So if you get caught, again, your children are taken away from you and you're put in jail. So that was a big risk in and of itself. At first, Pülein rebelled against that because, she was almost 10. She wanted to be popular. She wanted to fit in. And so she had to tell the lie. She went to school in Potsdam, but she lived in Wannsee. So she would tell her classmates that, oh yeah, I'm a member in Wannsee, and she would tell the Wannsee authorities, "Oh yeah, I'm a student in Potsdam. I'm in a program in Potsdam." And so, because she was a girl, they didn't really investigate it. Boys, it was different. They were training to become soldiers, so there was really no escaping the Hitler Youth if you were a boy. But for girls, they didn't care so much, so they were able to slip through the cracks. Little Gabi, on the other hand, it affected her very differently. She was very, very scared. She knew that if she said the wrong thing and her parents were suspected, that she would be taken away from her parents would go to jail, and she would be raised by somebody else. And so she was pretty terrified. And her reaction was to just clam up and say nothing. So here she was in school, barely speaking because she was so afraid of saying the wrong thing that she was nicknamed Die Dumme, which is German for the stupid one. Mm-hmm. And she wasn't at all stupid, but she was just terrified. And she didn't have a normal childhood. She was very withdrawn, and that just tore at the heart of her parents. But the decision to try to make a better Germany for her future, they felt that it was worth it. So they tried to give her everything that she needed at home. Mm-hmm. But as soon as she walked out the door, she was in hostile territory, and she was very quiet and misunderstood and ridiculed. And she suffered her whole life as a result.
Shocking. The impact on war, the impact of war on youth, and innocence.
Right.
Bloody horrible. Who is Pauline? Who's Pauline?
So Pauline is the older. Pauline, yeah, she's the older of the two girls, of Andre and Hertha. So Pauline is actually my mother.
Oh, okay.
So Pauline is her nickname. Her real name was Marie-Louise. But when she was 2 years old, she had a curly head of hair. So they called her Pippiline, which means little doll. And that was just shortened to Pauline. Okay. And she carried that till the day she died. Everybody knew her as Pauline.
Right. Well, the book is called Crossing the Line. The author is Elizabeth H. Van Doren. And you're listening to this on Nothing Like a Good Book with Mark Bishop, and I hope you're enjoying it. We're going in depth of this book. By the way, where is it going to be sold?
There will be some storefronts where you can find it, but in general, Barnes & Noble online, mm-hmm. Amazon online, and I am told countless other platforms, mm-hmm. Not just in this country, but other countries as well.
Oh, fabulous. Are you going to be doing book signings and so on?
That's the plan. Yep.
Good on you. Oh, I'd love to do that. Good on you. Well, that'll be exciting. Thanks. And I bet you're going to run across some people who are going to share some stuff with you never knew about, too, when this happens. You watch.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope this opens all kinds of interesting doors. I think that history is so, so, so important. It's important to remember its lessons, and it connects us in ways that are often surprising.
They are indeed. Now, Elizabeth, I'd like to touch on the role of women in the story. I'd like to examine the roles of the female characters in the book. Can you share that with us? I think there's Herta, Pauline,
Gabi,
Liliana, and there's another one too. Who's the other one?
Well, those are my main ones. There's a few. There's Gita. That's her classmate. Mm-hmm. Pauline's classmate.
Pauline. There's always a Gita. There's always a Gita, isn't there?
Yeah.
German.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And Liliana. Yeah. Liliana is whom now? Liliana
is a young Polish woman. She grew up in Warsaw. And so the book is told from 4 different main viewpoints, 4 first-person accounts. Mm-hmm. Andre is the only male. Then there's Pauline, Gabi, and Liliana. And I wanted to show with Liliana, who's essentially the same age as Pauline, but she's Jewish, how very different life was if you were Jewish or non-Jewish. Mm-hmm. Very similar girls, very similar personalities, very similar love of life. And then the war happened.
Yeah. All they've got to be is Jewish. That's it. Right.
That's right. They didn't have to do anything wrong.
No, nothing wrong. when you contribute to the narrative of this, I mean, their acts, it seems, of quiet defiance, how their perspectives provide a different lens through which to view these historical events. You know, people don't understand it wasn't all women, it wasn't all men, you know. At the end of the day, if you were Jewish, say goodnight, Dick. That's the way it was. Now, psychological impact of oppression on identity. Let's talk about that. Delve into the book how it explores the psychological toll of living under constant surveillance. That'd drive me nuts. Discuss how the characters struggle with maintaining their personal identities while being forced to conform to the ideals of the Nazi regime. You know, you can highlight the inner conflict characters as they try to preserve their values and beliefs in a dehumanizing environment. I mean, it must have been horrible.
Yeah, you had to learn how to play the game to stay above suspicion. For Andre, he worked for a company. Lerva was the name of the company, and initially he was an engineer, and so initially they made machinery basically, and they were also an electric company. It was a big company, did a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But when the war started, they turned to munitions production, and Andre, being an engineer, was assigned the task of improving the weaponry. And of course, this is weaponry that is used by his country in a war that he categorically rejected. Mm-hmm. But as long as he played the game and looked like he was trying to improve this weaponry, then he could remain above suspicion. But that was a fine line for him, because he was supposed to create weapons that were doing the exact thing that he was fighting against in his personal life.
Yeah.
So that was hard.
Going to work, making stuff, wondering who this is going to kill this time. You know?
Exactly.
What about the power of community, solidarity? In Crossing the Line, your book, you focus on how neighbors, friends, underground networks, they had some hotspur, didn't they, the underground networks. How do they come together to protect one another, do you think?
Well, even that was tricky, because people that were on your side on Monday could have been arrested on Wednesday and forced to turn, and you know, their survival then depended upon turning in people that were part of the network. Mm-hmm. So it was very difficult to maintain those connections, because the Gestapo got very, very good at figuring out who might be resistors. So it was hard to remain under the radar. Yeah. And Gestapo came to the house many times through the years, and they never were able to find anything. My grandfather was ultimately arrested and tortured, but he was able to go for many years, doing a lot of good things before that happened.
Good.
But, you know, the woman that lived next door, she was the daughter of friends of theirs. She was a secretary to Himmler, and she was part of the resistance efforts. So she was a very, very valuable asset, because she was able to see, you know, Himmler was one of the biggest of the bigwigs in the Nazi regime, and she was able to see a lot of the Nazi plans as she takes dictation and sends off letters and overhears phone calls. So she was really a wonderful asset.
Yeah, I mean, these acts that went on that you share in the book of the collective resistance, it helped individuals survive and in its own way resist the brutalities of the Nazi regime. And of course, it emphasized the importance of unity, doesn't it? In the face of adversity, unity is critical.
Absolutely. You can't do any of this stuff by yourself. It's a network where every piece of the chain has to be intact for any of it to work.
I mean, you've got to look at also the ethical complexities of survival, surrounding the characters' decisions to survive in this hostile environment. I mean, you consider how characters must navigate their moral compromises, betrayals, and impossible choices. You know, like all the characters you've mentioned, doing something, some way, somehow, See, you never know. I mean, as you say, Monday, fine. Wednesday, they're arrested. But also, whom do you trust all the time? Do you always have that question in the back of your mind?
You do. You do. Your radar, for Andre, he got very good at sensing when something was a little off, when somebody was acting a little more nervous than they usually do. And then he would just not say anything, hi, how are you? How's your wife? How are the kids? But nothing that would expose him. You had to really fine tune that sixth sense.
Well, when you read this book, folks, listeners, when you do read this book, I mean, there's a lot more to it than we can cover in 30 minutes, but you're going to explore the book's portrayal of survival as not just a physical struggle, but a moral and psychological one, where the line between right and wrong is often blurred. And you put yourself in that situation, you think, what would I do right now? Which way would I go? Yeah. Because,
right.
I mean, when you wrote this thing, did you ever get any shivers at all?
Oh, every emotion ran through me. But one of my goals truly was for the reader to sit back and think, what would I do if this was happening here? How would I react? Because it was very, very easy to conform. You were rewarded. You rose in status. You were given property. You were given jewels. You were given a raise at your job. Your kids got accolades at school. I mean, life was really good if you conformed. If you resisted, you lived a very different life. You lived in fear, and it was hard to resist. But it was, for the person who chose to resist, there was really no choice. When you see the brutality of the treatment of the Jewish people, not only the Jewish people, there were others that were classified as other.
Yeah.
Darker skinned people, LGBTQ people. So the list grew, and anybody that Hitler perceived as an enemy, whether or not they truly were, if he perceived them as such, they were, by the end of the war, most of them were dead. They had these sham trials where it was, decided guilt, but, before any kind of an argument ever took place, and then they were killed.
Harrowing stories. Last year I was in Amsterdam, and I mainly went there to go to the I call it a shrine, but Anne Frank's apartment and so on, and it was packed that day, and I was quite ill. I had pneumonia, but didn't know it at the time. And going up those stairs, very thin stairs, there were a lot of people. I had an oxygen tank with me. And I don't know how they survived for the length of time that they did. When you actually see how they escaped the Nazis for as long as they did in that building, and there were a lot more than Anne Frank's family who went through the same thing. But they
absolutely.
And the fear alone, I think people need to put themselves today in their homes and lock the front door and hope to God they're never discovered and just feel that alone. I mean, anybody can belt the front door down, anybody can come in the back door, anybody can break windows to find you. But that was absolutely amazing. I don't know how they did that, and I think everybody should do that, to be honest. Your website, https://ElizabethVanDoren.com. It doesn't have the H in there, Elizabeth, does it?
I'm sorry. I thought that it did.
Well, maybe it does.
I better check that.
Yes, you better check that.
I honestly never use my middle initial, except for writing this book. So
okay. Well, maybe it's a misprint given to me, but I thought I'd bring it up for your own sake because as much as, we wish well the other Elizabeth Van Doren, all your publicity for this doesn't need to go to her.
No. Well, she's a children's book writer, so I don't think the two will be confused.
Now, you also have your Facebook page, right? URL there on Facebook, they can find you. Instagram.com /author Elizabeth Van Doren, and there's another one without the H. And the Facebook, of course, is www.facebook.com/profile and so on. So there's plenty of things to find you on, listeners. Elizabeth H. Van Doren. A lot of people like to read about the author and caught your bio and the lovely pics that I got. The cover of the book is fabulous, whoever did that artwork. And mind you, it's pretty much, you've seen it around a little bit, but this is a little bit different. It's richly done. And that'll be up on my site permanently, as with your your bio and your photo. Look, folks, it's a harrowing yet inspiring story. If you've ever been down, you've got nothing to complain about. Read this. The story, Elizabeth H. Van Doren, she delivers a narrative that is both historically rich, very factual, and emotionally resonant. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, the light of resistance, it can shine through and win. Can't it, my dear?
Absolutely.
Well, I wish you all the luck. I think you'll do very well in Europe with this book, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah, Europeans, the war was fought on their turf, and they have not forgotten the war. Here, it's becoming much more remote. As the soldiers die, people don't think about World War II very much. But in Europe, it's still very much more alive.
But what does worry me in Europe are the skinheads and the Nazis and the swastikas that are appering. And
I know.
It's turned me away from going to Germany. I'm very open-minded, but I had... I wanted to do the camps as well, but I'll get there one day. But the reality is that is a worry, and that's got to stop. And the youth of today, they just don't appreciate it. And then you've got those that say, look, it never happened. The Holocaust is a lot of bunkum.
That's the most horrifying. That's the most horrifying of all. And that was another reason I decided to write this book. The more I spoke to people about the similarities of current politics here and historical events in the past, I realized how much had been forgotten, if it had ever been learned in the first place. So I was hoping to reteach in a relatable way the history that's happened.
This should be in the universities, this book, I'll tell you now, because as a guest of this country, although I've lived here 20 years now, from Australia, the reality is I get very upset when I read these stories of tenure, the professionals in the universities of America and what they teach. And that's the youth of America of tomorrow and the greatest country on earth, as they say.
Yeah.
And the reality is you put this book in their hands and let the kids read something like this, open them up a little bit. I mean, this last business that's gone on with the Palestinians and God knows what, no one understands the true history,
Right.
And the barricades are up and the this is up and that's up. It's something to be in. If they're not, taught early, educated early, then it's fearful for the future.
Right. Very hard to make good decisions if you don't heed the past.
Exactly. Well, I wish you all the very best in the world with this book. I hope it's a great seller for you. More importantly, that it helps a lot of people, it opens a lot of eyes, and it gets people asking questions, because I think that's what it's going to do. Elizabeth H. Van Doren, The Dark Clouds of Hitler's Tyranny. Never forget it and never let it happen again. This is a marvelous book. It's called Crossing the Line, and you can get it at Amazon and so on. By the way, are you selling this, Elizabeth, on your website?
There's a link on the website. It takes you to Amazon. The Kindle version you can purchase that directly on the website. Okay.
All right. Because that's a good thing, too. A lot of authors today, and all those that I do interview, they tend to, these days, they have a little video made, as you have. Think about it. It's hard to do a video of a book when it's so short, but it gives a bit of a feeling and a theme to it. And add to that, you can read excerpts from it if you want to, from a site and so on. But more and more authors are selling privately as well. I guess it just depends on what Amazon have to say and what some other outlets have to say. But I guess the more you can get it out there, and be very safe when you do your travel and you do your book signings. Have a good time and smile and meet some people and enjoy life. Promise me that?
I will absolutely do that. Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Lovely speaking with you.
Lovely to be interviewed. Thank you very, very much for your time.
You're most welcome. Elizabeth Van Doren, ladies and gentlemen. Absolute lady. Beautiful book. What's it called again, Mark? Come on now. I've mentioned it about 5 times. Crossing the Line. Crossing the Line, okay, by Elizabeth H. Van Doren. Make sure you get that right. You heard it here on Nothing Like a Good Book with Mark Bishop, and we'll be back with another one soon. I look forward to your company then.